I'm Tom Landrum, and I'm here today in the offices of Alston and Bird with my friend Robert G. Edge, better known as Bob Edge. We are in the offices of Alston and Bird in Atlanta, Georgia. Bob is, besides being a wonderful personal friend of mine, a longtime friend, a distinguished graduate of the University of Georgia whose relationship with the university began very young. And so, Bob, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how your days with the University of Georgia began.
I grew up in Lawrenceville, and I was fortunate to have a contact with our band director who knew Hugh Hudson. And this fellow, Warren Little, who played flute with the Atlanta Symphony, had taken some courses in the music department at that time. And he is the one who said to my mother that I should go over and interview with Hugh Hudson when I was in the 6th grade. Hugh Hudson was really the musical czar of Georgia at that time, the head of the music department, now the School of Music, which is named for Mr. Hugh. And so beginning at 12, I started driving over with my mother once a week to have lessons with Hugh Hudson. And it was much more than music lessons, piano lessons. He would say, he'd tell my mother, he said, this boy needs to come over here and come to my class on Wagner opera, or this boy, I was always kind of this boy needs to come and go to this concert that we are having. And so my affiliation with the university, goes back to 1950.
But you ultimately enrolled at the University of Georgia. I guess that stemmed from your early association then. That
Yes.
was your desire to come to UGA.
Yeah, I continued, studying with Mr. Hugh through high school, and then enrolled at the university in 1960. I'm there for 4 years. 1956, sorry. Graduating in 1960. And I was a music major. Originally doing a BFA, and I changed and I got an AB with a double major in music and English. And my dominant experience in so many ways was with the music department and Mr. Hudson, who really gave me so much.
Well, that's such an important time in the university's history in terms of the role that Hugh Hudson played with his music appreciation classes, and he's well known. The stories about how he introduced music to undergraduates at the university. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that experience as an undergraduate.
Well, the course was Fine Arts 300. That's the course that was available to the general student, and that included Hugh Hudson or somebody else from the music department teaching the music half of that, and either Lamar Dodd, head of the art department, or someone who working with him. And so it was that combination, and they were wonderful. So many people in the state of Georgia, they first found out about the fine arts, either music or the visual arts, either through Mr. Hugh or Lamar Dodd or their colleagues. And if you go back to people who were there in the 50s and the 60s, so many will tell you one of the great educational experiences I had was the exposure to the arts through the eyes of these two really great men.
Well, take a minute, if you will, and give us your firsthand memories and maybe insight into the kind of men that they were, Hugh Hudson and Lamar Dodd.
Well, Mr. Hugh was a great teacher with a different style, in the sense that his goal was to get you so interested in the subject that he was teaching that you would remain a student of that subject for a long time. And here I am, this many years later, and I'm still studying Wagner opera, or I'm still pursuing things that Mr. Hugh got me on the path to wanting to know more about. And to me, that's the mark of a really great teacher. that, I mean, the course does not end when you take that final exam, but it goes on because, you know, this teacher has stimulated you. And sometimes, you know, I think some of Mr. Hughes' courses, you probably did not learn as many specifics as you might have under other teachers, but, you know, a lot of those other teachers, when you had that exam, that was it. That was basically what you were going to get out of that course. I would say that with a course taught by Hugh Hudson, that, you know, a lot of the learning just began when you took the final exam. And, I mean, you might have to wait a few years before you had the time and resources to really pursue it. But that's certainly been true of me, and I think it's true of others. And Lamar Dodd was the same kind of teacher. It was not about just learning the specifics of a certain period in art or about a certain artist, but, you know, really catching, you know, the joy of the visual arts and knowing how to appreciate, you know, what goes into a fine painting or a fine piece of sculpture. And that was the gift of those teachers to me.
And I think I'm right in remembering that the fine arts department was fairly bare bones at that time. So both these individuals must have been the dominant figures in building it and fighting for the resources and fighting for the recognition that lay the groundwork for the kind of fine arts program that we have today.
Yes, well, it was the two of them, Hugh Hudson and Lamar Dodd, and Leighton Ballou was the head of the theater program. But the dominant figure in many ways was Hugh Hudson, because he was there first. As it turned out, Lamar Dodd was able to outscore him in different ways, in kind of some politics or whatever else. But Hugh Hudson was the chairman of the Fine Arts Division, and he never let Lamar or anybody else forget it. And he used his Atlanta connections, you know, to do wonderful things for the School of Music, and Lamar did the same. They both made such special contributions, and they were such great friends, but they were also competitors for resources and, you know, alumni support and that sort of thing. It was a wonderful day. But they were not the only ones. I mean, there are many great teachers. You know, when I was there in the late 50s, I was fortunate that I went from the university to Oxford in England and then to Yale Law School. But, you know, the most effective teaching I ever received was in Athens. Now, I had some special. I'd been going there a long time. I knew a lot of people, and but it was just not in music and in the arts that I got special attention. There were those, I think that the professors then, you know, had a personal investment in the students who obviously were more interested in the subjects or willing to do a little more work. George Parthemus comes to mind. The nurturing that he did, you know, of people, you know, was really extraordinary. And in those days, you know, so many of the professors they wanted their students to stay in Athens and go to law school here, go to grad school here. And George Parthemus said, you've had the Athens experience and it's wonderful, but you really ought to apply to Harvard. You ought to apply to Chicago. And that's a very special thing, motivation, I think, that someone like George Parthemus offered.
Well, Bob, I know that you applied, was nominated for a Rhodes Scholarship, and that the University of Georgia had not had too many Rhodes Scholars, I believe, by the time you were enrolled. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, I can. I was a member of Phi Kappa, the debate society, and a distinguished alum who came over and knew me through music circles and then saw me in this circle. He said, you know, you really ought to apply for Rhodes Scholarship, and I did. And there had not been one for many years, and so I did get lucky and got selected, and I think I was the 14th Rhodes Scholar
from the University
of Georgia. and I've taken great joy in the success that the university has had in recent years in having other students from Athens selected for the Rhodes Scholarship. But it was a great experience.
Well, give us maybe a snapshot of what occurred, say, for you personally there with the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford, and then what led you back, or how you came back to Georgia. And then I'd like for us to talk a little bit about your continuing relationship with your alma mater.
Well, when I went through the Rhodes Scholarship competitions, it was with the thought of my reading English and really becoming an English professor. And I decided I didn't have enough musical talent really to, have the successful life, and maybe I have more success being an English professor. And so, I got a letter from my tutor that I was going to have at Oxford with this tremendous reading list. So after graduating in May, June of 1960, I took off 10 days or so and started reading 8 hours a day on this reading list that this tutor in Oxford had sent me. And I happened to run into a Rhodes Scholar from Georgia, Alan Post, who was a distinguished lawyer in Atlanta. And he said, "What you been doing?" And I told him that I'd been reading, all sorts of things. What you been reading? Well, at that time I was in the middle of Fairy Queen, and I'd also been doing Anglo-Saxon grammar and all these things. And he said, "Well, do you think you want to do that the rest of your life?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure." And he said, "Well, you ought to be a lawyer." And I had been captain of the debate team in Athens, and I had done a lot of things that lawyers are supposed to be interested in. And so kind of on the spot, I changed and decided I would go to law school. So when I was in Oxford, I read politics, philosophy, and economics, and my tutors at Oxford really were not very good. I had a unlucky draw, as it were, that turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because I then had 2 years of just reading broadly in subjects I didn't know anything about, had not done any studies before, economics and philosophy especially, and then politics and international relations. And so it's just the ability to do widespread reading and also to travel extensively because of the Rhodes Scholarship, and also generous parents, that I had 2 spectacular years between Georgia and going to Yale Law School.
So you determined to apply for Yale then, I guess, at the conclusion of your Rhodes Scholarship.
Right.
Perhaps you could recount a bit of your Yale experience at law. I guess it's the typical law experience where you are immersed in the study of law for a 3-year period of time.
Yes, it's total immersion, and and that was fine. Expected that. I knew nothing about practicing law, and most people who go into law, I don't think they know much about it, but what it's going to be like. But it's proved to be a happy choice for me. Yale was a happy choice. It was a great law school, and with wonderful professors, wonderful students, and a different approach to the study of law. Not interested in memorization, but kind of getting the concepts and thinking and analyzing and seeing the law as it fits into the broader picture. Those are hallmarks of the Yale Law School, and it was a wonderful place to be.
Did you make any connections at that time between the fact that the founder of the University of Georgia, Abraham Baldwin, had come from Yale, as far as that connection is concerned?
Well, I was well aware of that, but it was beyond that. I can't say that it really scored in any way.
The law books took precedent over that.
Exactly.
Well, now after law school, then you decided to enter the practice of law. I guess you passed the bar and are located in Georgia.
Yeah, I came back to Atlanta. I came very close to staying in New York, because of the great firms there. I worked for a great firm one summer, and I came close to staying, and the musical resources there certainly attracted me. But in the end, I'm too rooted, and I wanted to come back home. and where I knew people and I was known a little bit, and that's I know that was the right decision for me. We have put down very deep roots here in Atlanta, my wife Betty and I, and I can't imagine that I could have had nearly the experience had I remained in New York. So it's and one reason to come back, of course, was to be associated with institutions that had been important in my life, and the most important institution had been the University of Georgia. So, and immediately when I came back, I started getting involved because I wanted to. And
well, let's talk about that then, because and first let me ask, when you came to Atlanta, you affiliated with a law firm. Was it the precursor of this firm, Alston & Bird?
Yes, it was Alston, Miller, and Gaines. And the head of the firm was Philip Alston, Jr. And Philip was as enthusiastic an alum as the university has ever had. And he was a great supporter in the most substantive way for the University of Georgia, and a lot of my involvement, he certainly encouraged, the involvement, doing activities in Athens, not just me, others, and so there was a very strong University of Georgia thread within Alston, Miller, and Gaines, which later became Alston & Bird. And Alston & Bird, by the way, Philip Alston and Buster Bird, they were really the alums who were behind the first merit scholarship program, and they played a key role. And I remember in the 60s they were very proud that the university had a very high percentage of merit scholarships relative to other state institutions, and that was Alston and Bird. They were not partners at that time, but later merged.
Well, that leads me to a follow-up to what you were saying earlier, is that, and again, somewhere along the way you met Betty, so I guess that was somewhere after Oxford, but before coming to Atlanta?
Yeah, no, Betty and I met after I came to Atlanta, and she was working at in Boston, and sometimes at the Harvard Business School. She came in '67, we met and married in 1969, and she's been very active in the community. And then we had our two girls, Elizabeth in '74 and Phoebe in '77.
And Betty, a very talented artist in her own right,
she's
a very wonderful photographer, and also a friend of mine that we've been pleased to have that relationship over the years. So you're a young lawyer with a firm with Alston, Miller, and Gaines, and you have the relationship with your alma mater. So how did you first begin to get involved in alumni activities?
Well, I mean, it starts with I was interested in the university and knew a lot of people over there, and they in turn, this was somebody to get involved. Tyus Butler, who was head of the Alumni Society, he played a big role in my getting involved. And then I had a lot of faculty friends, and they encouraged my involvement, and so it was the most natural thing in the world to do. And so I got involved with the Alumni Society, and I think one year I was the head of the annual fund drive when I think our goal was $150,000. That's the era when there was still the dominant feeling was the state provides the support for the state university. You don't give to a public institution. And overcoming that, was years away. And it was just beginning to think in terms of people saying, I went to that university, public university, and I need to contribute to it. The state is not going to provide everything it needs.
And certainly you have been part of that effort in other ways to make the transition from the University of Georgia being considered solely a state institution to being an institution that seeks excellence and needs the private money to achieve that. I think you began a term with the University of Georgia Foundation. You could perhaps share a bit of your experience in the early days. The foundation, I think, was formed in 1932. I believe I'm right on that. And it was still pretty young and pretty small in the late 60s when you were involved in it.
Well, it was an older white man's alumni club, if you really want to know the truth. And they didn't do a whole lot. And because this was just developing, these sorts of activities were then just developing at a public institution like Georgia. The most dominant voice in the foundation at that time was Philip Alston. He was secretary, but he was clearly the mover and shaker for the group. And I had been extremely involved in alumni activities with the alumni seminar and this activity and that activity. And one day Philip called me into his office and said, well, we've made you secretary of the foundation and you'll be working with Billy Stern, who's the new chairman, and go over and meet him. And so I think that was like in 1971, 72, early 70s. And he said, you need to get the alumni activities out of your way because you need to spend your time on the foundation. So that's what I did.
And that led ultimately to your serving as chairman of the University of Georgia Foundation for, I guess it was a 2-year term.
That's right.
And that would have been in the mid-70s?
No, that was like in 1982, I think, in the early 80s.
Okay.
And I was really a youngster in that group. I mean, everybody was a generation older than I was at the time. There were a couple of other younger trustees, but and I think that what we did with the with the real cooperation was to say, we've got to change, the demographics of this group. It just can't be a lot of older white guys.
Well, the university was changing at that time, and there was an effort to expand and better develop the university, how it reached out to its alumni and how it reached out to its external constituencies. But there is one important benchmark that you were a witness to and a participant in, and that was the idea of creating not only the merit scholarship opportunities, but the development of the premier scholarship effort at the university, which is today known as the Foundation Fellows. And you and I have talked about this in the past. Perhaps you could give a synopsis of that.
Well, I probably, 2 or 3 things that I've participated in Athens. I have a special feeling of feeling good about, being part of the establishment of the Foundation Fellows program. And the Rhodes Scholarship was not need-based, and that impressed me. And I knew that the Morehead scholarships at UNC were not need-based. And I was aware of people who were, good students who were leaving our state, and I met some of these, through various kinds of activities, but they left our state because the university had no scholarships beyond maybe $500. So if you could get a full scholarship to Princeton, you could go to Princeton on a full scholarship, about the same. It cost you a little more at Princeton, but not that much more. And we were losing those students because we didn't have any good scholarships. And given my, Rhodes experience that's not need-based and the Moreheads, I was very eager for us to adopt that idea. And so the Courts family had a scholarship that was not being used because it was too restrictive, and I talked to young Richard Courts, and I said, why don't we change it? Would you be willing to change that so we could really, have a scholarship that would mean something and help hold some students here in this state? And he was all for it. And then we had some money. Elliot Gaines was my law partner, was very much involved in all this, and he got Isabel Fraser to establish the Carlisle Fraser to come up with some money, and I got a client, great friend Vera Milner. She gave some money. So early on we started, the first 2 were the Courts and the Frasers, and I forget what they paid, but it was like $2,500. But at that time, the largest scholarship really was around $500. And to be perfectly frank, this idea was not warmly embraced by some people in Athens. They said they'd rather have 10 $500 scholarships than two $2,500. And we said, well, that's not your option. We're going to have two because we want to keep, some of these students in Georgia instead of having them go off to Princeton or wherever it might be. And so it was launched at that time, first with those two, and then the Milner Scholars, then one name for Eugene Black. Those are the early names that I remember. And we wanted to be more than just giving the money. We wanted to make sure they were given special opportunities, like the Moorhead Scholars at UNC were given. And so, again, this name, George Parthemus, who was a great professor and wonderful with students, he was the first academic person who really worked on the Foundation Fellows Program and make sure that these students could have an evening with Dean Rusk or with Lamar Dodd or with Eugene Odom and have some of those special experiences. And so it's an idea that really caught on, and then other people said, I'd like to give one of those special scholarships. And so I think it took about $100,000 in order to finance one of these scholarships at that time. And then, the snowball did grow, and then, Bernie Ramsey came along after the program was developed and made the decisively important gift that enabled for the program to be very expanded tremendously with really very, very special opportunities. And so I take great joy in having been a part of getting that snowball rolling.
Well, certainly that program today is so significant in the university's ability to recruit and retain the most distinguished students anywhere, and it has an effect not only for those students but for the quality of the entire student body. So that's a great example and a great story.
I might add one point to that. During all these years, I was very active in the Rhodes Scholar Selection Program, and we were not enjoying success in that area. And another reason for, in pushing this program was to get some students, who were somewhat stronger as students and give them special opportunities and, increase the likelihood that we might start competing more effectively for these great national scholarships. And again, I think we've had it. It took a while, but we've enjoyed some success in all that. And today, when you read that in one year the university has more winners for some of those scholarships than any other public university, it just fills me with real happiness.
And I would say that there is more than just a little irony in the fact that because of your early days involved with Hugh Hudson and then your later friendship with Lamar Dodd and your role in music and the fine arts, that you were asked to serve as chairman of the steering committee of a private fundraising effort that resulted in the construction of the new performing and, well, not new now, but it was a new performing and visual arts center on the East Campus. Maybe you could share some of your memories about that.
Well, when the Fine Arts building on the main campus was built in around 1940 or 42, whatever it was a wonderful, beautiful building for a small number of students. But by the 70s and the 80s, it was really a disaster from a facilities point of view. Good people teaching, some good students, terrible building. And so, the university recognized that, we're going to have to come up with some new facilities for the fine arts area. And the driving force behind that was Chuck Knapp, who had you, Tom, at his right hand. And so this became a priority item for the University of Georgia. And it was nice that I was asked to be involved in that. And I remember that in the early days, what we said, we wanted to really be first class. And they had a funny way of selecting architects at that time. It was kind of on a rotational basis. And to his great credit, Chuck Knapp was able to persuade the regents to let us have a national competition. And it was unbelievable. The greatest architects, not only in this country, but many of the great international architects said they would love to be involved in creating a fine arts campus. And so there was this competition that was held by the Board of Regents, but with strong input from Chuck. And Thompson Vincent Steinbach was selected, and they produced 3 extraordinary buildings for, as I recall, $34 million, 19 from the state, and we had private fundraising of $15 million. And I was part of that fundraising. But the conceptualization is also, I'm glad to have been a part of that. And
that addition to the campus took place during Chuck Knapp's administration, and then in recent years, President Michael Adams worked with fundraising and with the state again to have a building constructed for the School of Art, and also a addition to the existing Museum of Art. And I think, as you and I both know, the good news is that on the School of Music is the name of Hugh Hudson, and on the new School of Art is the name of Lamar Dodge. So, and you were present, I believe, at both dedications of both
Absolutely.
buildings.
Absolutely. Well, the people of the state can take great pride in the fact that we now have a fine arts campus that I don't know of a finer one on any university campus, and it's a tremendous resource. And but they're not just buildings; they have wonderful people. School of Music is very strong. We have a wonderful, museum on campus. And then the Lamar Dodge School. I've laughed a lot because the naming of the School of Music for Hugh Hudson came well after the School of Art had been named for Lamar. I know that Hugh Hudson slept better in his grave once he had caught up with Lamar Dodge in having a school named for him, and they both deserve schools.
Well, and then I know that you had been an emeritus member of the UGA Foundation, and then once again the university called on you to assume yet another leadership role, and that is as a member of the Arch Foundation. And I think you're serving on the Arch Foundation now as a member of its development committee and some of the other committees. And
actually, I'm investment and nominating governors. Those are my committees.
Well, then we'll go ahead and include you in the development committee as ex officio. But I think at this point, what I would like to do is just let you share any aspects about your perception of the university today, maybe some of its challenges, maybe how you relate to your knowledge, your deep and long knowledge of the university over its course of its history, and maybe what you think is exciting or challenging for the future.
Well, a first point would be that I am tremendously grateful, for the role that the university has played in my life. I mean, of all the institutions that I've been nurtured by, it's clearly number one. And I did have a special opportunity that was centered in Hugh Hudson and going over to study with him, but to participate in more than piano classes, from the time I was a little boy. And that led to so many, wonderful opportunities. But I had a wonderful experience. I mean, we did not have a lot of the outward indicia of excellence in play when I was there in the 56 to 60. but again, you know, that was made up for by having access to some extraordinary professors. And as I said, the worst professors I ever had was at Oxford. And so you can be at a great school and have bad professors or inadequate professors, or you're not relating to them in the way you should, whatever it may be. It doesn't work. But, you know, the university certainly worked for me. And, you know, my wife, Betty, says today that she is just astounded how when she talks to parents or their children who are at the university, and at all levels, people find, you know, this is a place that I really love, that really helps me. Well, they're strong, really, from the strongest group, or kind of, that's not their greatest strength. And the university has found a way to continue to relate to so many people and to be loved. And, you know, that is really great. So, personal gratitude, but also personal pride in where the university is today. Chuck Knapp did a great job. Fred Davidson did a lot of good things. Fred and I ended up kind of seeing some things differently, so we didn't have as close a relationship as I would have liked. He was president when I was chairman and very much involved. We saw, you know, some priorities differently, and so we were not as close. But Chuck and I were close. I think he did a wonderful job, and Mike Adams has been superb. And, you know, when you and I were chatting at lunch today, you know, we went through all that turmoil of 4 or 5 years ago, and when, you know, kind of the fights between the University of Georgia Foundation and Mike were going on, or some people within the foundation and Mike going on. The thing that was astounding is that the upward spiral of the University of Georgia, it just seemed unaffected. And, you know, if you read the newspaper, you would think things might be falling apart in Athens, then that was just not the case. I mean, things kept getting stronger, kept getting better in every way. And Mike has been a remarkable leader for our institution, and he's made a great mark, a mark of excellence. And I take, you know, a great pride in that. I also feel good. The university is so important to this state. I have friends in other institutions, and we debate all these things. But I mean, if you want to look at the institution that really, you know, is the engine behind so much of the great stuff that goes on in this state and in this region, in this nation, the University of Georgia is there. And to see it, you know, move from the, you know, days where it had limited resources and didn't have a lot of the marks of the indicia of excellence, and to see where it is today, it's a wonderful story. And it's happened because of great faculty members who have really stayed the course, and they have wanted that excellence to emerge. And they put up with kind of lack of support until they got to a time where there was more support. And it's the legacy of the great professors, you know, that I knew, George Parthemas and Hugh Hudson and Lamar Dodd and Eugene Odom, and you move, I mean, their legacy is being exemplified in so much of the excellence we see today.
Does it give you pause sometimes to think back and realize that you've had an association with your alma mater for probably more than 50 years?
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, my wife doesn't like me to mention anything 40 years, but when I say, well, I've almost 60-year involvement, no, I feel good about that. Yeah. And again, you know, it's been an intense, wonderful, you know, relationship, and I couldn't be happier about it.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you for the time you spent in this interview for our Going Back series, and the university certainly is proud of your role as an alumnus, and we hope you've had as much fun being an alumnus as we've had fun in having you be an alumnus.
Well, I think I've answered that already.
You have. Thank you.
Thank you.